Montana Territory, late spring of 1873. The sun had just ducked behind the cottonwoods, and the sky over the Bitterroot River burned gold and pink. Landon Avery reined in his chestnut gelding beside the river bend, his sharp eyes catching a flicker of movement near the bank. He thought maybe it was a wounded deer at first, but the closer he rode, the more he realized the sound rising above the water's hush was not an animal's cry. It was a woman, sobbing hard, curled into herself like she was trying to disappear. He was off his horse before it fully stopped. Boots crunching over damp leaves, he approached slow, careful not to startle her. Her dark hair clung to her cheeks, soaked through, and her dress was torn near the hem. She did not look up. "Miss," Landon said, voice low, gentle. "You hurt?" She flinched, then stiffened. One hand gripped the grass beside her. "I am fine. You are not." He crouched a few feet away, not touching her, but not leaving either. "What happened?" She shook her head, not answering. Her shoulders trembled, and he could see the mud on her sleeves, the way her boots were soaked through. She had been here a while. "My name is Landon Avery," he said. "I have a horse. I can help you. You do not have to tell me anything now, but you cannot stay out here with night falling." She looked up at him then, and he saw the pain in her eyes raw and cracked wide open. "They left me," she whispered. "My brother and his wife. They left me here." He frowned. "Left you? What?" "I said I would not marry the man they picked." Her voice cracked. "They said I was too much trouble, that I could find my own way." Landon's jaw clenched, but his voice stayed calm. "You do not deserve that." Her eyes dropped to the river. She hugged her arms close, the wind catching her skirt. "What is your name?" he asked. She hesitated, then said, "Calla Sutton." Landon moved closer, slow enough she could stop him if she wanted. When she did not flinch this time, he gently reached out and put his hand on her shoulder. "You are safe now, Calla," he said. "I promise you that." She looked up at him again, lips parting. Her eyes searched his face like she was trying to decide whether to believe him. Then, without a word, she leaned forward into his chest. He caught her easily, lifting her into his arms. She was light, but her body shook with every breath. He held her tighter. "I have a cabin a few miles west," he told her. "You can rest there, eat something. Nobody will bother you." She nodded against him, silent. He carried her to his horse, careful and steady. She did not let go of his shirt the whole way. The ride back was quiet. Calla did not speak, but she did not cry either. Her fingers stayed curled in the fabric of Landon's coat, and he felt her breath against his back. By the time they reached his homestead, stars had started to scatter above the trees. The cabin was small but solid, built by his own hands over the past 4 years. He had not shared it with anyone before. He helped her down and led her inside. The fire was already glowing in the hearth he had left it banked before riding out. He fetched a blanket, wrapping it around her shoulders, then set a pot of beans and cornbread on the stove to warm. She sat on the edge of his only chair, eyes tracking him as he moved. "You live here alone?" she asked, voice soft. He nodded. "Yes, ma'am. Since my father passed. This land was his, and now it is mine." "You are kind," she said. Landon turned from the stove to meet her gaze. "It is not kindness to do what is right." She blinked fast, then looked away. "I do not know where to go now. You are not going anywhere tonight. You can have the bed. I will sleep on the floor." "I cannot take your bed." "You are not taking it. I am giving it." She looked back at him, and something in her face eased. The next morning, she was sitting by the fire when he came in from feeding the horses. Her hair was brushed, and she wore one of his extra shirts tucked into her skirt. "I found eggs by the shed," she said. "I made us breakfast." He smiled. "Thank you." They ate in quiet, but the air between them had changed. Softer now. Safer. Landon leaned back in his chair. "You have any family left, Calla?" She stirred her eggs. "My parents passed 2 winters ago. My brother took me in, but I see now he only did it to trade me off. Said I was a burden. You are not." She looked at him, and for a moment, her eyes shone with something warm. "You do not even know me," she said. "I know you were crying by a river, and you are here now. That is enough for me." She stared at him, then gave a small, shaky smile. Over the next few days, Calla stayed. She helped with the chickens, tended the small garden behind the cabin, and swept the porch every morning. Landon watched her settle in like she belonged there, and something in his chest started to ache in the best way. He came back from town one evening with fabric and sugar, and she lit up like he had handed her gold. You did not need to. I wanted to, he cut in. She reached out and touched his arm, just for a second. Thank you, Landon. The way she said his name made his heart beat different. That night, they sat by the fire after supper. She was sewing a new hem on her dress, and he was mending a bridle. I never asked, he said. How old are you? 21, she replied. And you? 26. She nodded, her needle pausing. You ever been married? No. You. She shook her head. Never wanted to be until I met someone who made me feel safe. His hand stilled. When he looked over, she was already watching him. I have not felt safe in a long, long time, she whispered. Landon set the bridle down. He crossed the room and knelt in front of her, his hand brushing hers. You are safe now, he said again, quieter this time. With me. She set her sewing aside and leaned in, her forehead resting against his. I believe you, she whispered. I believe you, Landon. And just like that, something broke open between them, something real, something steady. Neither of them moved for a long time. The wind carried the scent of pine and thawed earth as the days edged deeper into June. Calla moved through the mornings with quiet purpose now, her hands busy with tasks that didn't need direction. Landon noticed how she walked farther from the cabin each day, collecting wild mint and yarrow near the edge of the trees, her shoulders no longer drawn up tight like they had been when she first arrived. One afternoon, while he was splitting cedar, she came to him with a bundle of stalks cradled in her arms. I found these near the ridge, she said. I used to make salve with the leaves, for burns and winter chapping. He leaned on the axe handle. You know much about medicine? She shifted the herbs in her arms. My mother did. She taught me before she passed. We didn't live near a proper doctor, so we had to learn. He nodded, stepping aside so she could lay the bundle on the porch rail. There's a cupboard inside that stays cool. You can keep your things there if you want. She looked at him a long moment before replying. Thank you. I'd like that. They worked in companionable silence until the sun sank low enough to turn the clouds violet. After supper, while she cleaned the skillet at the water barrel, Landon reached for the small wooden box he hadn't opened in years. Inside was a folded square of homespun and a brass locket dulled with age. When she came back in, wiping her hands, he held the locket out to her. I was going to give this to my mother the spring she died, he said. I never found anyone else I thought might want it. Calla looked at the chain resting in his palm, but didn't take it. Why now? Because you're not passing through, he said. And I'd rather you have it than let it stay shut in a box. She lifted the locket, her thumb brushing over the worn clasp. Did she like simple things? She liked things that meant something. Calla opened it, revealing the tiny pressed violet still tucked inside. Her breath caught. It's beautiful. He watched her fasten it around her neck with careful fingers. I'll keep it safe, she said. Landon didn't answer, but he reached over and brushed her hair back from her cheek. She leaned into his hand. That night, she left the bedroom door open a little. He didn't cross the threshold, but he paused there long enough for her to see him in the lamplight. Good night, Calla. Her voice was quiet. Good night, Landon. The following morning, she asked for a saw. I want to build a drying frame for the herbs, she said. There's no sense letting them mold in a bundle. He brought her the saw, and together they cut lengths of pine and nailed them into a square. While she tied the last length of muslin across the frame, he watched the way her brow furrowed with focus. You ever miss where you came from? He asked. She tied a knot deftly before answering. Sometimes, but I don't miss how it felt to be there. He understood that. There were things he had left behind, 2 things better left quiet. What about you? She said, straightening. You ever think of leaving this place? He shook his head. I've worked too hard to make it mine. Out there, folks don't care who you are. Here, you get to decide what your life looks like. Her gaze held his, steady and open. Then I think I'm right where I belong. A bluebird called from the fence post outside, and she turned to hang the frame near the stove. Landon stayed where he was, the warmth in his chest rising slow and sure. Later that week, they rode into the nearest settlement, Red Elk Crossing, about 3 miles east. The general store sat beside a livery and a feed barn, and the air smelled of leather and horses. Calla stayed close as they stepped inside, her hand brushing his as they passed through the door. While she examined spools of thread, Landon exchanged quiet words with the storekeeper, arranging for a bolt of gingham and a pair of boots to be added to his tab. Calla blinked when he handed them to her outside the store. You didn't have to. I wanted to. She smiled, and this time it reached her eyes. On the ride home, they stopped beneath a cottonwood where the creek cut shallow and clear. She climbed down first, kneeling to cup her hands in the water. You always take care of people like this? She asked, not looking at him. No, he said. Only you. She stood, wiping her hands on her skirt. Why me? He stepped closer, the horses grazing behind them. Because I see who you are. And I want to. Calla didn't answer, but she reached for his hand, fingers threading through his slow and certain. They rode the rest of the way with her knee brushing his. Neither spoke. That night, there were no words left to say. She came to him in the quiet between lamplight and sleep, her hand resting gently on his chest as they lay side by side, the air between them warm and still. Neither asked for promises. They didn't need to. By mid-July, the cottonwoods cast longer shadows across the yard, and the days settled into a rhythm that neither of them disrupted. The soil around the porch had begun to yield small shoots of squash and cabbage, and Calla knelt beside them each morning, her palms dusted with earth, her brow shaded by the brim of Landon's old hat. One evening, as the sun melted behind the ridge, she stood at the fence line, watching a pair of elk move through the distant brush. Landon approached with a tin cup of boiled chicory, offering it without a word. She took it, fingers brushing his. Her gaze stayed on the treeling. I used to think quiet was something you had to fill, she said. Now it feels like something I'd fight to keep. He leaned against the post beside her. Noise comes easy. Peace doesn't. She nodded slowly, then turned toward him. Do you ever wish you'd left Montana? No, he said. But I used to think I'd always be alone here. Calla took a sip, then handed the cup back. You're not. That night, she brought out an old ledger she'd found in the bottom of a drawer. You ever keep track of things? She asked, laying it open on the table. I tally the horses I've traded and the feed I use, that's all. She dipped the pen in ink. I could start a proper journal. What's planted? What's stored? What needs mending before snow? He sat beside her, watching the neat slope of her handwriting. You've thought about staying through winter. I have. She didn't look up. If you want me to. His answer was simple. I do. Over the next weeks, she stitched muslin into sacks for flour and beans, lined the shelves with dried mint and willow bark, and repacked the root cellar with layers of straw. Landon built a lean-to against the shed for firewood, and she helped stack it, her hands blistering, then toughening. One morning, as she washed linens in the creek, she paused and called over her shoulder. There's a hollow in the cedar tree back there. Could be a good place for a beehive. He stepped down the bank behind her. You know how to keep bees? My mother did. I watched enough times to learn. She wrung a sheet, water trailing down her forearms. If we can find a swarm, I could try. I'll ride out past the meadow next week, he said. See if there's a hive we can cut from. She smiled faintly, but it was different than before, full of something settled. Later that day, as a storm rolled low across the valley, they sat under the porch eaves, listening to the thunder. Calla rested her cheek against her knees, hair damp from the wind. Did you ever think, she said quietly, that a life could start over just by being left behind? He watched the dark line of rain move across the hills. Never, but I believe it now. She reached for his hand. So do I. The air cooled as the rain softened, and without speaking, they stood and walked back inside. That night, Landon lit the oil lamp and folded back the quilt on the bed. She stepped into the room behind him, pulling her braid loose. He turned to face her, and she reached up, fingertips against his jaw. I want to build something with you, she said. Not just survive. I want to live. You already are, he said, voice low. So am I. She drew him down to her, and the quiet between them deepened into something whole. When morning came, the sun rose pale and warm, and the cabin felt like it had always been theirs. The first frost came early that year, and with it the hush of animals bedding down deep and the trees turning brittle at the edges. Landon had been cutting wood near the west slope when he heard Calla calling his name, not panicked, but clear and urgent. He dropped the axe mid-swing and jogged up the incline, wiping sweat from his brow with his sleeve. She stood at the edge of the grove, her skirt caught with one hand and the other pointing toward a narrow rise in the distance. There's smoke, she said, just beyond the ridge. thin but fresh. He followed her line of sight. That's close to the abandoned trapper's lodge. I didn't think anyone stayed out here past September. They don't. They saddled the horses without another word. The trail was overgrown, the kind of path that hadn't seen boot prints in years, but Calla rode steady behind him. The hem of her cloak pulled tight beneath her knees. The air grew colder the higher they climbed, and a hawk circled once overhead before vanishing beyond the trees. They reached the crest just as the sun dipped behind the peaks. Smoke curled from a makeshift chimney, too thin for a hearth fire, more like pine needles and damp bark thrown together in haste. A mule was tethered near the lodge's lean-to, ribs showing beneath its coat. Landon dismounted and motioned for Calla to wait. She didn't argue. He approached slow, boots crunching frost-bitten ground. The door creaked when he knocked. A man's voice, rough and strained, answered. Inside, the room smelled of old blood and mildew. A trapper, older than Landon by at least 15 years, lay wrapped in a wool blanket on the floor. His leg was splinted with a branch, but the swelling had crawled past the knee. I slipped coming down from Rock Bluff, the man rasped. Been here 3 nights. Thought I wouldn't see another. I'll get you to town, Landon said. But you'll lose that leg if you stay out here another day. When he stepped outside again, Calla was already tying a length of canvas to the back of her saddle. We can make a travois, she said. But we'll have to move by moonlight. He won't survive a full day out here. He looked at her, surprised and grateful. You sure? I've seen worse. They worked in silence, their movements practiced and spare. She bound the canvas with a cross wrapping he hadn't seen before, then lined it with pine boughs to soften the ride. The trapper groaned once as they lifted him, but didn't speak again. They reached town before dawn, the sky pale and raw. Landon handed the man off to Doc Carraway, who promised to send word if he pulled through. As they rode home, Calla's head dipped forward against the saddle horn, exhaustion pulling her quiet. You know, Landon said as they crossed the flat near the river, you didn't hesitate. Not once. There wasn't time for it. He reached over, steadying her reins for the last stretch. You're more than strong, Calla. She didn't answer, but her hand found his on the leather and stayed there. Back at the cabin, she slept straight through until dusk. When she woke, she came out barefoot, hair still mussed, and joined him on the porch where he was oiling his rifle stock. I've been thinking, she said. If we're going to keep living out here, we need to be ready for anything. We've done all right so far. I want to build something permanent. A second room. A proper root cellar. Maybe even a smokehouse come spring. He set the rifle aside. You thinking long years? She sat beside him, drawing her knees up. I'm thinking I want a life with you that doesn't wait on the next emergency. Landon studied her face, the steadiness in it, the way she met his eyes without flinching. Then that's what we'll do. She leaned her shoulder against his. We'll need nails. And ash planks. And a saw blade that doesn't catch. I'll ride to Red Elk tomorrow. I'll come with you. She smiled, faint and new. We can pick out paint for the door while we're there. He laughed softly, the sound low in his chest. Any color you want. Then I want red. They sat long after the sun dipped down, the chill wrapping around them, the land quiet and waiting. Beneath the porch, a stray cat Calla had lured in with scraps curled itself against the step. She reached down, scratching it behind the ears. We should name it, she said. He tilted his head. You pick. She thought for a moment. How about Mercy? Landon nodded once. That fits. And beside him, Calla Sutton, no longer lost, no longer waiting to be cast off, rested her hand in his, the red locket at her throat catching a glint of firelight through the window pane. The first snow came in early November, soft and steady over the cabin roof, muting the world in white. Calla stood at the window with a wool shawl around her shoulders, watching the flakes drift in slow spirals, gathering along the fence rails and blanketing the garden rows she had cleared weeks before. The red door, dry now beneath a fresh coat, stood out like a hearthstone against the pale hush. Landon came in from the shed with a bundle of kindling under one arm and his coat wet at the shoulders. He shook the snow from his hat before stepping over the threshold. The mare's favoring her back leg again, he said, setting the wood by the stove. I'll wrap it with warm cloth in the morning. Calla turned from the window. I can steep comfrey in lard. It helps swelling if packed tight. He nodded, already reaching for the kettle. I'll bring the cloth in before dawn. She crossed the room and took the kettle from his hands to fill it. You've been up since before first light. He leaned against the table, watching her. You notice everything. Her mouth curved, quiet and certain. I live here now. The warmth between them had grown into something rooted, not sudden. Every gesture had weight, earned by the days they had spent building this life with no audience but the trees and the open sky. That night, as the wind picked up and the snow deepened outside, they sat close on the floor near the hearth. The oil lamp flickered low behind them, shadows rising and falling across the log walls. Calla reached into the chest and pulled out a folded square of fabric. I started something, she said, laying it across her lap. It's not finished, but I want you to see. Landon leaned in. The quilt top was pieced with old shirts and flour sacks, stitched in uneven blocks, each square holding a different pattern, some striped, some plain, one with tiny faded stars. I used cloth from both of us, she said. I meant to surprise you when it was done. He touched one square, the fabric from the shirt he'd worn the day he found her by the river. You remember everything. Her hand stilled. I want to. Nothing before you ever felt worth keeping. He looked at her then, the firelight catching the soft line of her jaw, the locket still resting just above the hollow of her throat. I never expected to find anything like this. Not out here. Calla reached for his hand and held it against her chest. You didn't find it. We made it. They lay together that night with the unfinished quilt between them, her head tucked beneath his chin, the wind curling against the shutters. The silence wasn't empty, it pulsed with belonging. In the weeks that followed, the snow deepened and the world narrowed to the land between the cabin and the barn. They rose early and moved with quiet purpose, chopping ice from the trough, carrying water inside by the pail, taking turns at the stove. Calla read aloud from an old almanac in the evenings, her voice low and even, while Landon carved new handles for the draw knife and the awl. One evening, as the sun dipped behind a curtain of cloud, she looked up from the table where she had been writing in the ledger. I want to be your wife, Landon. He set his whittling aside and met her gaze. You already are, in every way that counts. I want the rest too, she said. I want it said out loud, with your name next to mine in the town book. I want to take vows with your hand in mine. He didn't speak right away. He crossed the room, knelt beside her, and took her hand in his calloused palm. Then we'll go to the crossing, he said. First clear day? I'll stand with you before God and anyone who cares to witness. She smiled, not shy but steady. Then it settled. They rode out 5 days later, bundled in wool and oilskin, with snow packed hard beneath the horses' hooves. The preacher met them in the back room of the mercantile, the fire snapping in the pot-belly stove. Landon wore a clean shirt and his father's coat. Calla had a sprig of dried juniper tucked into her braid. They exchanged vows with their hands clasped and their eyes steady. No one else was needed. Afterward, they shared a meal in the boarding house kitchen, just the two of them, and toasted with warm cider. Landon slid a narrow silver band onto her finger, passed down from his mother's side, and she leaned across the table to kiss his cheek. When they returned home, the snow had softened under a late sun. The cabin, with its red door and smoke curling from the stone chimney, waited for them like it had always known they'd return together. Inside, Calla hung her shawl by the door and turned toward him. There's nothing I'd change, she said. Not one thing. He crossed the room and wrapped his arms around her, pressing his forehead to hers. You're everything I never knew I wanted, and I'll spend every day making this place a home for you. She smiled, her fingers resting over the locket. We already have. Years passed, and the world outside the valley kept changing, but the cabin remained. They built the second room, planted an orchard of crabapple and chokecherry, raised 3 milk goats and a pair of hounds. The red door faded and was painted again, twice. Calla kept her ledger, filling it with notes on planting seasons, snowfall, and the names of every calf born under their roof. Landon taught her to use the crosscut saw, and she taught him how to bind cracked hands in beeswax and cotton. On their 5th spring, they stood beneath a blooming cottonwood and watched the creek swell with meltwater. You think we'll grow old here? She asked, her voice low. He laced his fingers through hers. We already are. Together. And they did. Together, through every season that came and went, through each snowfall and thaw, each harvest in hush. Their days passed in quiet, in work, in laughter beneath the eaves. And at night, they lay side by side with the quilt she'd finished that first winter, stitched with the fabric of two lives joined by choice, by grace, and by love that never once wavered.